Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Shattered Lives. Now, it's been a busy couple of days, busy week and a half, I would say. I had a couple of days off and kind of left Mick and the rest of everybody else to it. And in the process of it all, that GSOC story really blew up, didn't it? But we've quite a lot to discuss even outside of that. So without further ado, I have to introduce our crime correspondent, Michael O'Toole. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Chief Reporter Paul Healy.
Very important.
Right, enough of the love in. Call me a bollocks. I much prefer that.
Yeah, hello to the bollocks. So I think just one of the first things that I would like to discuss, because we didn't really have a proper opportunity to discuss it last week, was the GRA conference. This is the annual conference of the Garda Representative Association, a massive organisation that represents guards up and down the country, rank and file Gardaí. And I attended it last week. It's a huge 3-day conference in Westport there in County Mayo. And it was a particularly controversial headline-grabbing conference, I would say, because of this ongoing row, this rosters row, Garda Síochána. We spoke about this on one of our previous pods, but effectively Gardaí across the country are very annoyed and upset about this potential return to a very unsociable working hours and difficult working hours. That's summing it up quite probably a little bit too much, but effectively this row between Garda management and rank and file Gardaí has been spilling over, and things came to a head with the Garda Commissioner last week, didn't it, Mick?
Yes, and you were at it, so, and I wasn't, but I was watching it. Well, I was watching it from a distance about that. I'm going next year. But anyway, I thought it was really interesting. I remember, I think it was around 2011, 2012, Alan Shatter Fine Gael was the then Justice Minister, and it was the AGSI conference, which is the Association of Garda Sergeants and Inspectors. And 3 delegates effectively staged the walkout. Yeah. And it was big news at the time. I think they were from down the country, and I remember it. It was big news. That, they faced repercussions about that, and it was very big news at the time. And I remember they were spoken to by a very senior officer in Garda headquarters, and I thought that was pretty heavy. But I was stunned, and I'm not overusing that word. I was stunned when I heard that Garda Commissioner Gerry Hutch, when he was giving this speech to delegates from all around the country, he was booed.
Yes, he effectively was jeered at, and that was in relation to a comment that he made about making compromises in relation to this rosters row, this discussion that's been going on. He said that he had already made compromises, but he can't be the only one to make compromises, and that provoked a reaction within the room. Now, in fairness, tempers were measured shortly after that. The GRA president, Brendan O'Connor, did calm the room and did remind people that the Garda Commissioner was a guest, and in the end of the day, he was entitled to speak. But you could sense in the room, just the level of, I suppose, anger and resentment over this issue at this stage with management within Garda Síochána. And also there was just a general feeling of annoyance over some of the comments that the Garda Commissioner made, even to the media. One of the issues that was being raised to us by the GRA was that that many of their members are under such pressure and are going through all kinds of manners of serious incidents, that some of them are suffering from PTSD. And when the Garda Commissioner was asked about that, he was a little bit dismissive of it, and even made a comment to the effect of, "I'm not sure that I would describe it as PTSD." Well, that provoked a massive reaction among members, because they felt this is another example of someone at a senior level who is just completely out of touch with what's going on the ground. So there's a huge dichotomy there between management and members on the ground, and you could really feel that frustration there last week.
And it just struck me, Paul, it had to be, I thought it was pretty seismic that a commissioner would be booed like that. Yeah. I really couldn't believe it when it first happened, but for me, that's an indicator that people are at breaking point. Because the guards, and they'll always tell you this, the guards are a disciplined organization. Discipline is one of their main core points. It's really important that a superintendent directs an inspector, who directs a sergeant, who directs a guard. It's disciplined. You have to do as you're ordered. So it's in their DNA, shall we say. that you show respect to your, especially the number one, as he's called in the Guards. So what must have been the feeling within those members who were part of the delegates for them to catcall and boo the commissioner? That's pretty serious. I think that it shows you how bad morale is.
And that was the theme of the entire conference, was breaking point. Yes, they used those words. They did feel that the force is a breaking point. I think that came across as well in your interview, Mick, with Laura Young. I mean, she walked out of the Guards, and I did have a number of members speak to me about that interview that you conducted, and they felt the same way, and they know many people that feel the same way within the force, that they're just at breaking point, and they feel like there's a number of, I think the number is 500 Gardaí might be expected to walk out by the end of this year. Am I correct on that figure?
Yeah, you're right. So
it's extraordinary.
Just to explain it, the people leaving can do one of two. Well, they can do three things. They can be sacked, they can resign, or they can retire. You have to retire at 60 unless you get an extension. But last year there were 109 resignations, so people quitting the force. Now, in 2016, it was about 25, and it has gone up incrementally. But last year was the first time, because I always put an FOI in. First thing I do in January, put an FOI in for resignations. So I did it the year before last, and it was nudging 100, but this time it was 109. So it's over 100. And I think we're well on the way to be higher this year. So the 500 figure is based on resignations and also retirements. So you can't stop retirements. People have to retire.
Sure.
But you can stop resignations. And when I did that interview with Laura Young, I was really surprised by how much it took off, but also how a number of members contacted me privately and going, I'm in the same boat as her. If I could, I would go. So I'm very worried about this. I have to say, I think it's a major problem, and it's only going to get bigger. But there is just what you were talking about the commissioner perhaps feeling slightly removed from people on the ground. The commissioner didn't start in the Guards. He obviously started in the RUC and now the PSNI, and he worked his way up. But I'm always struck, just speaking genuinely, about people who reach rank within the Guards. And Guards will always say this about, unlike the Defence Forces where officers become cadets and they're not privates, they're cadets and they get commissioned. In the Guards, everybody starts off as a guard, or what you and I, or what the lads would call a mule. So you're a mule, you're on the regular, or you get into specialist units, you're a guard, a 5'8", it used to be called, right? But everybody who's a superintendent, largely, apart from people brought in from outside, started off as a guard. And I was amazed by how quickly people who do reach rank forget what it was like to be in the front line and be a guard. And I think a lot of people are frustrated about that.
Yeah, you can really sense that. And I think this is an issue that's going to go on and on. I think perhaps we should speak to Brendan O'Connor in the coming days. He'd be an excellent guest to speak on this issue, and we may well do that.
There is, it's remarkable when, sometimes, Paul, when you're so close to a story, things are passing, like you were there. I'm sure you were, like everything, we're always working our yin-yangs off because you have to file for online in the paper, and so many things to happen. But when I heard the commissioner talking about, what was it? My gang is bigger than your gang.
Yes.
This is the elephant in the room, okay? And we're going to talk about it because we can't shy away from this. Our listeners wouldn't expect us to, especially the Guards. What was the reaction down there when he said that?
Almost universal bafflement. Just everyone just was like, I can't believe he said that. To make that comparison, just to give people the context. Obviously, we were speaking about Drew Harris was speaking to the media about the Hutch verdict, not guilty verdict, and in a message to criminal gangs in general, although obviously a direct message to the Hutch organised crime group, he said that my gang is bigger than their gang. Obviously a headline drawing comment, I would say, not something he came up with on the spot. But who knows, maybe he did. An extraordinary comment. I mean, obviously, straight away the reaction on the floor among members was just incredulous. I mean, people couldn't believe that he said it. But Brendan O'Connor, the president of GRA, did throw those words back at the Garda Commissioner when it came to, when it came to this rosters row and being out of touch, and that he did finish his speech by saying, "Well, Commissioner, throw your own words back at you. Our gang is bigger than your gang." But he has effectively, whether he intended to or not, he drew a very obvious line between management and members. So at least that's how they felt about it once he made that comment.
Yes, I'm going to be honest, and our listeners expect us to be honest. So I'm going to be honest about what people I've been speaking to. It went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about guards, I'm talking about people of various ranks.
Yeah.
And one of the refrains that I got was, I'm not in a gang. I joined the guards to protect people. I'm not in a gang. Don't be saying I'm in a gang. Now,
Yeah.
one fella said, oh, it hasn't really been mentioned, to be fair. So
Mm-hmm.
he said that, right? But of the people I spoke to, some of the comments were, I actually wrote them down, thought it was very childish. I just thought there was no need for it. But also, it was like, look,
Yes.
don't compare us to a gang. We're there to protect the people. We're not in a gang. I did not join the guards to be part of a gang. I joined the guards
Yeah.
to protect people.
Well, many of them did feel, yes, you're bringing it down to their level. You're almost comparing yourself to criminals and saying we're also a gang. Yeah. So I mean, there was a lot of resentment for that particular remark.
No, but maybe that just might be the old adage about, look, there are
Yeah.
two audiences here, and the audience the commissioner was speaking to was not members of the Garda Síochána. It was the people on the outside. And the one lad I spoke to did say, look, to be fair, I can see where he's coming from. I can see exactly what his point was, but I don't think the view would be it probably wasn't the finest. It wasn't received in the best way by Gardaí because their whole thing was, I'm not in a gang. And effectively, people are, I did see some commentary on Twitter, not the Twitter accounts, but people going, well, now they've confirmed you're in a gang. You know what I mean? So
yes.
People were very unhappy about it, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yes, but also to be fair, to give the other argument, people do say things that they then immediately regret. And I do recall that the commissioner, whether he joked or not, I do recall when he walked off, he did say something to the effect of, I shouldn't have said that. So I think he did acknowledge or realize perhaps it was a foolish remark, even 30 seconds after saying it.
I think that's given me an idea for all my fuck ups on Twitter and stuff. That would be a very, very, not only a pod, but a series of pods, because I certainly I've certainly said a lot of stupid things in my time, but that's the beauty of life. Okay, so
you know about GSOC?
Yes, far ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can speak about as much about this as I can, but just to say, obviously, I took a couple of days off, and it shit really hit the fan.
So look, let's do a recap. I'll do a recap. So you got this great story about.
Thank you.
I won't say that again because I'll have to explode. About eventually a former GSOC investigator who went in. I think it was on the Tuesday. The acquittal for Gerry. No. He went in on the Tuesday and told people that he'd been at a party the night before.
Oh, yes, the next day, yes.
Yeah. So Gerry Hutch was acquitted of the murder of David Byrne on the last Monday week. There was a bit of a get-together at a location in North Dublin. We're not going to say where it was, but it was Mr. Hutch attended it, and various people from the neighbourhood or the area did. And this man went into GSOC where he was working as an investigator from outside the state. And also, again, let's clarify, GSOC are not Gardaí, because a number of people who think GSOC are Gardaí. But he said he'd been at a party and you reported it and it hit the fan. Then he resigned before the story broke. But basically, it became very, very, very big story. One of the reasons why the GSOC called in the Gardaí, the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, who started an investigation. They spoke to this man voluntarily. The investigation started on Monday after the party, so a week after the party. Your story was on the Friday, so on the Monday the investigation started. They spoke to him, I think, on Monday evening voluntarily, and then very, very quickly Thursday morning they knock on the door and they arrest him.
Yes,
and that was very quick.
And that's the development. I suppose I underestimated the size of this. Really, I mean, don't get me wrong. When I was told this information and lucky enough to break the story, I obviously knew that it was a big story and it had potentially seismic consequences. But I still felt on the basis of the information that I had when it initially, and this goes to tell you how a story evolves. That's why I'm trying to explain it like this, because people might not necessarily understand that you don't have all the information from the get-go. And the information we had was he attended, allegedly said that he attended this party, and the initial information was that I was a kind of an innocent explanation of I'm a neighbor and I got invited to a party and I fucked up and maybe I shouldn't have gone, but that there's no conflict of interest. And there was an internal investigation, but he was supposedly cooperating with that. But once the Gardaí got involved, and once it became a investigation into whether there was criminal wrongdoing, it certainly escalated. And then, so I was at the GRA conference when I heard that there was going to be a Garda investigation after GSOC referred it to the guards. And then not long after that, 24 hours later, he's under arrest. So that all happened while we were down at the GRA. So He cooperated with the probe. I think initially there were fears because he is a foreign national and he was a police officer in a foreign country. There was a feeling that he would return to that jurisdiction. He had no need to cooperate with the probe, but he did, as you said, Mick. He voluntarily spoke to the guards and he was arrested.
But sorry, just to interrupt. We don't need to say allegedly. He's admitted it.
He has now since.
Yeah.
No, I'm explaining that when I initially broke the story. He hadn't even acknowledged, it hadn't even been acknowledged that he'd definitely gone to the party. It was only said that he had told somebody.
And that's important because your story was that there was an investigation after he said he'd been at it. So, and but he did. So we're grand. But I was just really stunned. I was really, really interested about how quickly it developed. Now, you cannot be arrested for going to a party, right? No. So when I heard he was arrested, I went, holy shit, what's this all about? But then we brought it on. So it was under Section 81 of the Garda Síochána Act of 2005. Now, Section 62 is what we normally focus on there. That's Gardaí are banned or not permitted to leak anything that will damage an investigation. There's no blanket ban on leaking. It's for leaking something that will damage, and there's loads of caveats, right? So there's no blanket ban. But there's Section 81, which is for GSOC. So that man was arrested on suspicion of leaking information. That can cause damage. Now, and this is where it's significant because under that law, the prescription of the penalty is very strong. It's a fine of €75,000 and 7 years in the clink. So that's very, very serious. So we know that the man has been released without charge, but it's fair to say there is a significant Garda investigation underway.
Yeah, and I mean that's escalated quickly. I mean, obviously, for them to be investigating him under that potential offence, it is obviously an allegation of much more than just attending a party. And as we mentioned before, this officer, he was investigating the death of Detective Superintendent Colin Fox, who was the lead investigator in the Regency investigation. So even still, a huge conflict of interest in that he's then attending the party by the very man who was accused of that crime. And also on that, just in attending the GRA myself, and this is perhaps something I didn't initially think of until we got down there, just, how the guards feel about a GSOC investigator being alleged to have committed wrongdoing. There was a sense of, well, now we now know that there's a guard investigation, but there was a sense of, well, who investigates the investigators? Because GSOC obviously investigate the guards, but there's no accountability, they felt, for those investigators, GSOC members. And there was concern over that. And I was even told that there were members of Garda Síochána who had come to, who had expressed concern to the GRA that they themselves had actually been the subject of an investigation by this exact GSOC officer. And they now were expressing concern that this individual was looking into them and whatever the fallout of that was. And then here he is suspected of criminality himself. So there's a huge fallout to this.
But, it is important to say they are legitimate concerns.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things we brought it on, this man has access to a system called Pulse. Most people will know what that is. That's the Garda computer system. It contains intelligence. It contains loads of different facts. He had unfettered access to that.
Yes.
Now, and he had access to, if he was investigating guards, he had access to every detail about any guard. And
he had the Regency investigation file, the whole thing.
And we know that he got the Regency investigation file, and there were thousands of different documents, including, and look, here's an elephant in the room, right? Gerry Hutch, because he's obviously charged with the murder of David Byrne, so he was what they call an SO, a suspect offender. So his details, there is absolutely no doubt Gerry Hutch's details, including his address, which is very important, were on all the paperwork that this man got. Now, I know we're not saying where it happened, but I think it's fair to say it was in close proximity to where Gerry Hutch lives.
Yes, indeed it was.
Extreme close proximity.
Yeah, and this individual who's this GSOC investigator was living on the same street. Yeah, so
he would have seen, when you're listed as a suspect, your name, your date of birth, not your age, your date of birth, and your address is listed. So it's incomprehensible for me that he wouldn't have known that Gerry Hutch lived on that same street where he was living. So one of the questions that I have is, did he tell GSOC? And we don't know.
We don't know. Those are outlying questions. We'll have to see where it goes. But I guess I underestimated, despite still knowing the size of the story, I underestimated just how big it would be, and then how much it has rolled over, and the many questions that now need to be answered. Yeah, no doubt we'll still be talking about it.
Speaking of questions, I hat tip to our colleague Danny Duval, because he
was
the only journalist really, and I was quite surprised by this. Look, I suggested to the news desk, lads, that we knew that I had been at a Garda station. Yeah, I'd been at a Garda station on Thursday evening when he'd been arrested, and we were sitting outside, but he was still in custody, so he didn't come out. It was way past deadline. So the next morning I was off, and I said, look, lads, this guy's out. He's right for a doorstep. Now, you were off as well. So Danny got the short straw, and to be fair to Danny, he went up and he knocked, and then there was a remarkable, what's the word? Chase across Dublin, from one part of Dublin to another, and they waited outside an office for several hours, and the man finally came out, and he sort of, he did us a favor, because we probably would have had to pixelate him, because he's not been identified, but rather kindly, what was it, a jumper he had over his head?
It looks to be a jumper or a jacket or something he's got wrapped around himself, yeah.
So it was a slam dunk, because we got the picture, and we didn't have to pixelate it because he had his face covered, but we asked the questions, and I was just surprised that nobody else had bothered. But anyway, look, we do what we do. But it was great to get him.
It was, and here's another fallout from it now. I mean, there are now concerns for this man's safety. I believe he's moved out of the address that he was on in North Dublin, and legitimately so. Obviously, because of alleged connections to the Hutch gang, there will be concerns over his safety in that regard. And also, we did report this, although we have not named him. He has been named in another jurisdiction in another publication, so his name is out there.
Yeah, so, but forgive me for being skeptical, but who is potentially going to harm or threaten him? I mean, let's be realistic.
Yeah,
I don't think
my information was just simply that I suppose precautions have to be taken because his name is out there and because of the alleged connection. I don't think he has been given any kind of gym form or anything of that formality, but certainly, obviously, he has concerns, in regards to his safety, given the fact also he's moved out of the location that he was residing in as a result of this. So there's a huge fallout to this. Still don't know where it's all going to go. Obviously, there's a Garda investigation now. There's been calls for a separate independent inquiry in relation to all of it as well. And the Minister for Justice has expressed concerns, other members of government. So, yeah, it's been a huge fallout to it.
Well, anyway,
we move on.
Yeah, just fair play to Danny Duval and Colin Keegan for getting the pictures. And the pictures are still up on the Mirror website if you want to have a look. They're really, really great pictures, and
they're great.
It's well worth the stake out.
They tell the story.
What's next? Jonathan
Dowdall, briefly. Kind of fed up talking about Hutch and Dowdall. I'm sure people are also fed up, but it's just a story that keeps on going. And so the development that happened last week was that Patrick Dowdall, Jonathan's father, was released from prison. He has served a portion of his 2-year sentence for facilitating the murder of David Byrne by booking that now famous hotel room for flat cap Kevin Murray. So he's out. He's a free man. I understand he is in protective custody. I don't believe that either of them have been granted the witness protection program, but I believe that the guards are monitoring his movements now in relation to since his release. That's the father. But Jonathan is still in prison and in Limerick prison. But the information I got during the week was, and in fairness, it has been reported, we have reported ourselves, that they did intend to move Jonathan Dowdall. His bags were packed. But moving Jonathan Dowdall is extremely complicated, I've been told, because where do you move a prisoner such as him? You can't put him in, and even though Portlaoise is the most maximum security prison in the country, there is still concern that enemies of his are in Portlaoise prison. He has enemies in Mountjoy, enemies in Wheatfield, so you can't put him in any of the traditional maximum security prisons. So there's talk now of placing Jonathan Dowdall in Arbour Hill prison, which is typically reserved for sex offenders only at this stage. It used to be mixed, but it is now effectively almost 100% sex offenders. But I'm being told that the likelihood is that he will be moved there, that it just makes the most sense. And one of the main reasons why he's being moved has very little to do with him and more to do with this ongoing overcrowding crisis within the Irish prison system. And I'm told that the landing that he's currently on in Limerick prison, he has entirely to himself. Now, it's a tiny corridor that I think can house up to between 10 and 12, about a dozen prisoners can be housed in it in total. And at the moment, you've got no one other than Jonathan Dowdall on that landing. So I've been told, listen, we need to move him because we can't have an overcrowding crisis and have one person on an entire corridor. So they want to shift him out of there so they can fill this landing effectively. But it hasn't happened yet because they're still having talks about it. And it may well end up that he's not moved to Arbor Hill. But at the moment, Arbor Hill has been selected as the most likely candidate.
So Patrick's out.
Patrick, the father, is out.
Yes. Now, I wouldn't go down the road of calling it protective custody. We don't have that. He might be in a safe house somewhere or something.
Yes. Sorry.
So, you know what I mean? No,
yes.
That's interesting. But and you know, look, journalism is sometimes a very difficult art, and it's very difficult to get information. You'd be of the belief that neither of them at this stage has been admitted to the witness security program.
That's my belief. Yes.
Okay. So that'll be interesting. I a couple of pods ago, I told you of my belief that it was unlikely that Jonathan would be entered. I did change my mind on that after speaking to various people, but it's going to be. I don't think certain guards are overly happy about Dowdall being admitted to the program, but he'd probably have to. I think even as a duty of care, because imagine if they didn't, and you know, for various reasons they didn't, and he's walking down the road and somebody tries to shoot him and shoot, you know, it'd just be horrendous. So I think my view now is it's inevitable, grudgingly, but inevitable that he will be admitted to it.
Yes, but that may not have to happen, or they may not have to deal with that until the end of his sentence. So at the moment, it's just about what prison do you keep him in. Then he's going to have his appeal. Has been pointed out to me that Arbor Hill would be very handy in relation to his appeal because he can just be taken straight up the road to the CCJ and straight back to the prison. So, you know, but we'll have to revisit the witness protection thing. And I think even if that does happen, we might not ever definitively know necessarily. And it will be illegal for us to identify where he's gone or where he is or at all. That'll be it. Yeah, it'll be the last you ever hear of him.
Just before you move on, Paul, one thing came to mind. You mentioned Limerick Prison, and while you were at the GRA, there was another story that we have covered about Limerick Prison. Barbie Kardashian, one of two transgender prisoners in the women's section of Limerick Prison. I always made the mistake of saying Limerick Women's Prison. It's Limerick Prison. There's a women's section in Limerick Prison. I had to change that with the subs at the last minute because I realized. Anyway, so we've been writing about concerns about her presence in that court, and we had in that wing, and we had explained that she's in a special area. She is with women. She's with other women there. She's with another transgender prisoner. That other transgender prisoner doesn't cause any problems. And it's important to say that. Not a peep out of her. The same cannot be said for Barbie Kardashian. And there is an investigation into her. And the allegation is that last week she threatened to rape female prison officers in the prison. Now, she did get what's called, you would know about this, a P19, which is an internal disciplinary process. And I heard about that. And that normally, in a case like this where you threaten harm like that, you'd be moved, but there's no really to move her. They can move her to the Docus, but I think they're intent on keeping her in Limerick. But I did make further inquiries, and I did establish that the prison service has made a criminal complaint to the Garda Síochána. So they're now investigating this. So there's a criminal investigation into this. Now, she's in a lot of trouble. And I was trying to figure out what the maximum penalty for threats to rape. I found people getting, I think around 8 years for threats to rape and kill, but I don't know necessarily about threats to rape. However, it's an indictable offence, so you're probably talking at least 5 years for this. Wow. And there is an investigation under the way into this. But she is a massive problem. The other transgender prisoner isn't. There are natal women in the same landing as Barbie Kardashian and this other trans prisoner, but they are kept away from them. Barbie Kardashian is locked up. No other female prisoners go near. It was explained to me that she's at the end of the corridor. Yes. All the other prisoners go out their door and turn left or turn right, and they don't go anywhere near. But she's on the same landing as other women. But she is a serious problem. And you made a very valid point. She'd be a serious problem wherever she was incarcerated.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. As we discussed this previously, like, I'm told she's under effectively, what is it, 21-hour lockdown?
23, I think.
No, it's not as much as that because she does get time to go into the yard and into the gym, albeit on her own. But she's a huge challenge. And I was told that even if in the event you moved her into a male facility, which they legally cannot do currently, it would be the exact same conditions, could not mix with the prison population ever. That's the feeling, because such of the danger. So yeah, I mean, she's a real headache for the prison service.
And without sounding like the other transgender prisoner, not a problem. But I do think, I don't know if you've been told this, but the sort of guidance I was given by people who would have a knowledge is it's most likely that I think they're building another block or wing, another block in Limerick prison.
And it's a whole new prison.
Yeah. So, and she'll be sent there. There'll be,
I
think there'll be a dedicated area, maybe for transgender prisoners. But she is a problem.
Yeah, they're testing out. The prison service are modeling different means of dealing with this. Well, not this particular issue, because obviously Barbie Kardashian is an outlier and a unique case. But just even in dealing with gender issues, they are reassessing how they deal with that matter. And there is a possibility that a prisoner like Barbie Kardashian could end up in a male facility. But even still, she's a unique case, and I think she'll always be under a form of solitary confinement.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's even what people were saying about maybe within that new prison, the block wing, there might be a special thing. And I think our thoughts are with the female prison officers who are allegedly threatened. It must be very, very hard for them. So our thoughts with them. Okay, so
you had a story this week. This is the death of a lady in County Sligo, and this is a complicated case. It was not as crystal clear as some of these things are at times. Tell us a bit about it. What do you understand so far?
Yes, and this is just perhaps an illustration of the sort of stuff that you and I do behind the scenes, because so essentially a lady called Angela Canavan, who was a native of a place called Keena, just outside Crossmolina in County Mayo, moved to St. John's Terrace in central Sligo 5 or 6 years ago, and she's been living there. And I got a wee sniff on Monday evening that it turned out to be her, but a lady's body had been found in a house in the St. John's Terrace area. But case like that, it seemed that it wasn't clear what happened. And as often happens, Gardaí will say, we're investigating all the circumstances, and the PM, the post-mortem, and various other forensics and stuff will determine the course of the investigation. So I know that I was off. I think you were working on it on the Tuesday, and your guidance was that it had been a fall. So there wasn't a real belief that it was anything suspicious.
Yes, well, my guidance was that was the way that it was headed, but obviously they have to look at the post-mortem and a couple of other factors and assess. There was a question mark over it. There was, but I think there was a feeling based off a number of other factors that it potentially was a fall. But
this is just an indication of we can only
go with what we're guided with.
Exactly. And we're not guards, and we're not in the conferences. So anyway, so on Wednesday, I was back at work, and I was just chatting with somebody, and I was saying, what's the story with Sligo is? I'm told it's not suspicious. And they went, wouldn't know about that. Maybe veering the other way. So I did a bit more digging, and essentially what has happened is she did suffer a fall, and she was found with head injuries. But the post-mortem was inconclusive. Now, what that means is, I'm not talking about this case, but there was no, overt one way or the other signs that it wasn't accidental or it was accidental. So it's inconclusive. It could have been this, it could have been that. But I think as yesterday went on, I think Gardaí did become more of the view that it wasn't an accident and that she may have been assaulted. And God love the poor woman. She had a bit of a hard life. Just talking to people in the area, she had suffered a brain injury maybe 5 years ago herself. So her life had been quite hard the last couple of years. But look, it is one of those cases. It's very much still up in the air, and the guards would still say they're investigating all the circumstances. But I think the pendulum has swung now to it being suspicious. So we'll await to see developments on that.
Very good. And you had a very good chat. This is one of these unexpected mad stories that you don't expect to happen, but it's an incredible story of someone, I suppose, turning their life around. So you did an interview with a man named Ian Maloney. Yeah,
and it's remarkable. We've spoken about your GSOC story about these things just appear. And I was somebody communicated with me a couple of days beforehand and sent me a screen grab of a page from Ian Maloney. He's a man, and he admitted himself he's got more than around 100 convictions, including one for an armed robbery in which 1.2 million euro was stolen. Now that was, I think it was 2008, and he got a good long stretch, 12 years, I think, for that. And we'd known him. His nickname was Mad Dog. Now he's not very happy about that, but his nickname is Mad Dog Maloney. And a couple of months ago, there was a story that he'd written a poem in honor of a cellmate. A cellmate of his died in the Midlands prison in 2015. A man called Eugene Cullen, who was also in Maloney's from Crumlin. Eugene Cullen was from Crumlin, serving life for a murder, and he died a suspected overdose. And Ian Maloney fought to save him. He tried to save his life along with prison officers, but he died. He was obviously very upset about that. But then, essentially, my source told me this guy has written a book of poems. So I chanced my arm. I contacted him, and I said, "Look," and I think this is really important for journalism. It's not. He's a convicted criminal, but he's still a person. You know what I mean? So I contacted him and I chanced my arm and I said, "Look, would you be up for talking about this?" And he was. And he gave me some really great comments. He said, "I'm trying to put this life behind me. I know that he said, I know you've got a job to do. I know that you can say whatever, say what you want about my criminal past and everything. I'm trying to put this behind me and I'm trying to get a new life and write poetry." And it was actually a really moving interview talking to him. And I did have several conversations with him. And I tweeted afterwards, "Look, we can only take this man as it were, on his word." Several Gardaí were a bit skeptical about it. But they did wish him all the best. And I personally wish him all the best. And I spoke to him after the story was printed. I'd been speaking to somebody who said, "Yeah, look, he's got a hard road ahead of him." And I said, "Look, Ian, somebody said this." And he said, "Yeah, but it's not going to stop me." So look, he was, as the cliche goes, extremely well known to Gardaí. 100 convictions around that, very, very serious ones. His name was all over the place. We would have been one of our people we'd have an interest in. But I like the cut of his jib, I have to say, and I thought he was genuine. So please God, I hope it worked for him.
Yeah, well, isn't that great that somebody, I suppose, can turn their life around and maybe be an example to others? And also, just in terms of crime journalism, there often the criticism is you only ever highlight the negative, the bad things. Obviously, crime is bad, right? But it's great that you could write a story like that and someone can go on the record and tell a positive story of how they want to turn their lives around. It can be an example maybe to others that even if you have committed crimes, maybe even the worst crimes, that your life is not over and that you can turn it around. So taking him at his word, obviously, hopefully Mr. Maloney is a credit to himself and to others and an example to others, sorry. So yeah, great story.
And one thing that I was happy about that I think I'm not breaking any confidence. I think he would be happy enough that the story was fair. We have to talk about his convictions. We can't not talk about his convictions. But we gave him plenty of space in which he talked about his regrets. He talked about how he got into crime. We agreed that he wouldn't talk about the person. We wouldn't name the person, but he did suffer a bereavement when he was in his mid-teens, and it devastated him. And he was honest, and he said it turned him to a life of crime. He hadn't been involved in crime before that. So I thought it was very moving, and I was happy in that he accepted the story was fair. We weren't going to shaft him, and understandably, he has a vision or a sort of a belief or a view of crime correspondence. That's no problem, but hopefully he can have learned something, and I certainly did. So I hope it works out for him.
Absolutely. Shall we leave it there? I think we've discussed a lot of topics, but that
was a great chat.
There's plenty more going on next week, no doubt. Just to flag that on Monday, the Hutch trial may be over, but the trial of Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy is not. We will be hearing the sentencing hearing for both men next Monday. So I'm sure we'll cover that. I'll definitely be sitting in on that, and we'll see whether there's anything that probably will be worth discussing in relation to that next week.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.